Screen was clean. Nothing moving. Nothing radiating. Nothing to suggest that somewhere on the western coast of Crimea, a Bastion P coastal missile system was sitting dark and cold in a dry riverbed, its operators following strict emissions discipline, its Onyx anti-ship missiles pointed at the Black Sea corridor that Ukraine desperately needed to reclaim. For weeks, that battery had been invisible, not destroyed, not relocated, simply silent. And silence, in modern warfare, is sometimes the most dangerous thing of all. I'm your host at Ukraine Radar, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down one of the most patient, methodical, long-range precision strikes of the entire Black Sea campaign. A story about intelligence discipline, electromagnetic ambush, and the moment a Ukrainian signal cell caught the one mistake that a Russian coastal defense crew could not afford to make. This is how Ukraine found the Bastion battery near Yevpatoriya, and what happened the moment it powered its radar up. The western corridor of Crimea had been contested water since the full-scale invasion began. Russian coastal defense doctrine is built around layered denial zones. Stack anti-ship capabilities so deep and so redundant that any naval threat approaching from the west faces overlapping engagement envelopes no surface fleet could survive. The Bastion P sits at the center of that doctrine. It is not a relic. It is not Soviet-era improvisation. The Bastion is a modern Russian coastal defense complex capable of launching the P-800 Onyx, a sea-skimming supersonic anti-ship missile with a range approaching 300 kilometers in some configurations, traveling at Mach 2.5 in terminal approach. A single Onyx hit on a warship is catastrophic. A salvo of 4 removes a destroyer from the battlefield permanently. For Ukraine, which had been systematically dismantling Russian Black Sea Fleet surface combatants using naval drones and Neptune missiles, the Bastion battery near Yevpatoriya was not just a defensive asset, it was a blockade. As long as that battery was operational and credible, any Ukrainian naval drone operating in the western approaches risked being tracked and countered. The electromagnetic umbrella it threw over the corridor was as effective as a physical barrier. So before Ukraine could fully exploit what its naval drone campaign had already achieved, the partial clearing of the Russian surface fleet from Sevastopol, someone had to solve the Bastion problem. That task fell to a signals intelligence cell operating under Ukrainian military intelligence. Their tools were not tanks, not missiles, not even drones in the traditional sense. Their primary weapon was patience and a collection of passive electronic receivers distributed across a geographic area large enough to triangulate any emitter that came up on the air. The cell had a simple brief: find the Bastion, track it without touching it, wait. Which weapon proved most decisive in the final strike sequence? The ATACMS, the targeting provided by SIGINT, or the satellite confirmation that locked the coordinates. A. ATACMS ballistic missiles. B. Electronic signals intelligence. C. Satellite imagery confirmation. Think about it. We'll get to the answer before the end. 3 months. That is how long the signal cell had been looking before they got their first solid lead. 3 months of collecting frequency data, correlating it against known Bastion radar signatures, cross-referencing vehicle movement patterns from commercial satellite imagery, and running analysis against the background electronic noise that any large military installation generates, even when it is trying to be quiet. The problem with hunting a system like the Bastion is that its operators know the threat. Russian coastal defense crews are trained to understand that radar emissions are targeting data. Every second the targeting radar runs, it is broadcasting its own location to anyone with a receiver sophisticated enough to collect it. So the doctrine says, keep the radar cold, use passive optics, rely on external cueing. Only unmask when you are seconds from firing. For the signal cell, this discipline made the hunt almost impossible. Almost. Because there is one moment when even the most disciplined crew has to unmask. Live fire drills. When a Bastion crew conducts an exercise that includes a realistic targeting sequence. Not a simulated one, but an actual radar-on and tracking run against a live or simulated target. The radar has to radiate, not for long, but long enough. Ukrainian intelligence, according to sources familiar with the operation, had pieced together the pattern of Russian coastal defense exercise cycles in Crimea over several months. The pattern suggested that batteries rotated through live fire drills on a roughly predictable schedule, with exercises concentrated during windows that correlated with favorable weather, fleet availability, and command oversight visits. Not perfectly clockwork, but predictable enough that the signal cell could narrow their collection posture to specific time windows and specific geographic sectors. The dry riverbed south of Yevpatoriya had come up several times in satellite imagery analysis, not because the vehicles had been spotted directly. The concealment discipline was good enough to prevent that in most passes. But the access patterns to the area, track marks on rural roads leading in and out, and occasional anomalous infrared signatures in nighttime commercial imagery suggested sustained human and vehicle presence in an area with no obvious civilian purpose. The signals cell flagged the location. They repositioned collection assets, and they waited for the drill cycle to come around. Stay with me. What happens in the next phase of this operation destroys not just a missile battery, but the entire western Crimea denial zone in a single strike sequence. The weather in the weeks before the strike had been brutal. A low-pressure system had pushed in from the Black Sea, bringing low cloud cover, reduced visibility, and winds gusting above 40 kilometers per hour across the western peninsula. For the Bastion crew, this was uncomfortable, but not mission-limiting. The Onyx missile performs in all weather. The targeting radar cuts through rain and cloud. If anything, poor weather historically made Russian coastal defense commanders more comfortable with live-fire practice, because degraded visibility reduced the risk of their radar signature being observed by anything other than electronic means. But this weather was also the first major obstacle for the SIGINT cell. The storm degraded the performance of some collection nodes. Two receivers positioned to provide geographic triangulation on the western Yevpatoriya approach went intermittent in the high winds, reducing the cell's ability to precisely geolocate a signal even if they caught one. The solution was improvised and distinctly Ukrainian in character. Additional collection capacity was pushed into the coverage area using assets that could operate in conditions where fixed ground nodes could not. The details of how that was done remain classified. What matters is that by the time the storm began to clear and conditions for a drill exercise became favorable again, the signal cell had rebuilt enough triangulation geometry to work with. They didn't have to wait much longer. At 9:17 a.m., on a morning when visibility over the western Crimea coast had improved enough for operational activity, the signal cell detected an emissions event consistent with the Bastion targeting radar signature. It lasted 11 seconds. Then it went cold again. 11 seconds. Enough. The triangulation solution placed the emitter in a 400-meter confidence ellipse centered on the dry riverbed that had been flagged in the satellite imagery analysis. Not perfect, not pinpoint, but in ATACMS targeting terms, close enough to be lethal. The cell pushed the data upward through the targeting chain. Satellite imagery was tasked against the location within the hour. The imagery return, analyzed by both Ukrainian and Allied intelligence assets according to open-source reporting, showed vehicle signatures consistent with the Bastion P launcher configuration. Two tail vehicles, transporter erector launchers carrying the missile rounds, plus what appeared to be a command module and support vehicles, partially concealed under camouflage netting. The coordinates were confirmed. The fire mission was generated. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happens next is a textbook case of how precision intelligence turns into a precision strike. But the story almost ended differently before it reached that point. The targeting package was being finalized when a complication emerged that nearly forced a delay. An adjacent Ukrainian collection asset detected a possible secondary signal from a different location, approximately 6 kilometers north of the primary target. The signal characteristics were close enough to the Bastion radar that initial analysis flagged the possibility of a decoy emitter, or possibly a second launcher moved to a separate firing position. This was the second major obstacle. If the northern signal was a real launcher, a strike on only the primary position would leave a functional Bastion P element in the field, capable of reacting. If it was a decoy, Russian forces had used radar reflectors and false emitter devices throughout the conflict. Then waiting to confirm it risked losing the window on the primary target entirely. The Ukrainian targeting cell made a call within 38 minutes of receiving the ambiguous secondary signal. Satellite imagery on the northern location showed no vehicle signatures consistent with a real launcher deployment. Ground conditions in the area were soft from the recent rain, and there were no track impressions leading to the position that matched the weight signature of a Bastion TL. The signal was assessed as a decoy emitter. The fire mission on the primary position was approved. What you have to understand about ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System, is what it means when Ukraine has it and uses it on a target like this. The M39 variant carries a warhead of approximately 560 pounds of conventional explosive in a unitary configuration, delivered to a maximum range of approximately 165 kilometers depending on variant. The M57 variant extends that range. Both are GPS guided with inertial backup, giving them a circular error probable, the radius within which half of all shots will land, of under 5 meters in favorable conditions. For a target sitting in a 400-meter confidence ellipse, 5 meters CEP is overkill in the best sense. The limiting factor was not missile accuracy. The limiting factor was coordinate quality. And after satellite confirmation, coordinate quality was good enough. The fire mission called for a multi-round salvo to ensure destruction of both the launcher vehicles and the associated command and support elements at the location. Ukrainian General Staff, reporting on similar strikes, combined with OSINT analysis of the post-strike imagery that emerged in the days following the operation, suggests the strike sequence involved at least 6 ATACMS rounds, potentially more. 6 ATACMS rounds, traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 3 in terminal phase, impacting a position that the crew inside it did not know had been targeted. At 2:14 p.m., the first round impacted the dry riverbed south of Yevpatoriya. The flight time from launch to impact for an ATACMS at that range is approximately 3 to 4 minutes, depending on trajectory and variant. In those 3 to 4 minutes, the Bastion crew had no warning. Their radar was cold. Their threat detection was passive. The ATACMS does not emit in a way that an air defense radar pointed at the ground would typically catch at short range, and its terminal approach angle, coming down steeply from high altitude, meant that even a functioning air defense radar in the vicinity would have had seconds, not minutes, of engagement opportunity. The crew had no seconds. They had nothing. The first 2 rounds impacted within 8 meters of the lead TL vehicle. The secondary detonation of the Onyx missiles it was carrying, each round containing approximately 200 kilograms of high explosive in its warhead section, added an enormous secondary explosion to the primary blast. The fireball was visible from several kilometers. The thermal signature was captured by satellite imagery, retasked to provide post-strike battle damage assessment. Here's a question worth sitting with. Could the Russians have prevented this? Could better emissions discipline or a different drill protocol have saved that battery? Drop your analysis in the comments. It gets to the heart of how this war is actually being fought. The command module vehicle, parked approximately 35 meters from the lead T-Hell, was destroyed by the 3rd and 4th rounds. The 2 additional support vehicles at the position, likely a fuel truck and a maintenance element, were destroyed or mission killed by subsequent impacts. Post-strike imagery analysis confirmed, according to Ukrainian military sources and independent OSINT tracking, that both TL vehicles at the position were destroyed. The Onyx missiles they carried were destroyed in place. The command module was destroyed. Support vehicles were destroyed. The Bastion P battery that had been guarding the western Crimea approach corridor ceased to exist as a functional military system in approximately 40 seconds of impact sequence. If you think patience and intelligence discipline are more decisive than sheer firepower in modern warfare, type Ukraine radar in the comments. This operation is the argument. The aftermath unfolded in stages. In the immediate hours following the strike, Ukrainian signals intelligence detected frantic communications traffic on Russian military frequencies associated with the Coastal Defense Command network in western Crimea. The content of those communications, as described by Ukrainian intelligence sources in subsequent reporting, indicated confusion about the scope of the strike, the method of targeting, and the status of other coastal defense elements in the region. This is the intelligence value of a strike like this that goes beyond the destroyed hardware. When you hit a position that was believed to be well concealed and emissions disciplined, the Russian command has to ask an uncomfortable question. How did Ukraine find it? That question forces a cascade of responses. Review of all emissions, discipline protocols across all units, potential repositioning of other assets, possible suspension of live fire drill cycles that are essential for crew training and readiness, investigation of potential informant networks in the area. Every one of those responses costs time, money, and operational readiness. The Bastion battery was worth approximately $180 to $220 million in acquisition and deployment cost, according to open-source estimates of the system's procurement pricing. The Onyx missiles on the launchers added tens of millions more, but the disruption cost to Russian coastal defense planning in western Crimea, the rescheduled drills, the repositioned assets, the investigation, the lost training cycles, is harder to quantify and arguably more strategically significant. Because here's what the destruction of that battery actually meant for the Black Sea corridor. The western approach to Crimea, the maritime zone that Russian Bastion coverage had been actively contesting, became measurably less dangerous for Ukrainian naval drone operations in the weeks that followed the strike. Ukrainian Marine Drone Command, according to open-source tracking of naval drone activity in the Black Sea, increased the tempo and geographic range of operations in the western corridor in the period following the confirmed destruction of the Yevpatoriya area battery. The connection is not coincidental, it is doctrinal. Ukraine's naval drone campaign had already demonstrated that Ukrainian Magura V5 and similar surface drone platforms could threaten Russian vessels throughout the Black Sea if they could get into the engagement corridor. The Bastion battery was the cap on that corridor. With it removed, the operational geometry changed. This is the strategic lesson worth stating plainly. Ukraine did not need to achieve air superiority over Western Crimea. Ukraine did not need to land troops on the peninsula's western coast. Ukraine needed to remove one specific system performing one specific denial function. Identify it, track it, wait for the moment of maximum vulnerability, strike with precision, move on. 3 months of collection work, 11 seconds of radar emissions, 40 seconds of strike impact. The math of modern warfare is brutal in its efficiency. What would NATO doctrine have done differently in this scenario? Would a heavier, faster strike package have achieved the same result? Or was the extended patience of the SIGINT collection cycle precisely what made the difference? Comment your analysis below. Now, the answer to the quiz question from earlier: which weapon was most decisive? The ATACMS, the SIGINT, or the satellite confirmation? The correct answer is B, electronic signals intelligence. Here is why. The ATACMS is a precision weapon that requires precise coordinates to achieve precision effects. Without the SIGINT cell's 11-second collection event and the triangulation solution it produced, there were no coordinates to give the missiles. The satellite confirmation narrowed the confidence ellipse, but the fundamental targeting datum, the location of the emitter, came from the signals receivers that had been patiently waiting for exactly this moment. The ATACMS was the final instrument of destruction. The SIGINT was the prerequisite without which none of it was possible. In modern warfare, the sensor is as important as the shooter, often more important. Ukraine's investment in signals intelligence capability, some of it indigenous, some developed with allied support, all of it integrated into a targeting pipeline that can move from emission detection to fire mission approval in under an hour, is one of the core asymmetric advantages it holds against a Russian military that still struggles to understand what it means to fight a signals-aware opponent. Was waiting 3 months the right call? Could Russia have broken the pattern if its drill cycles had been truly random? And if you had been commanding that Ukrainian signals cell, what would you have done differently? Will Ukrainian naval drones fully exploit this corridor opening, or will Russia rapidly reconstitute coastal defense coverage in the west? Comment why yes if you think the window stays open, or no if you think Russia adapts in time. We read every comment. Subscribe to Ukraine Radar, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The dry riverbed south of Yevpatoriya is quiet now. The scrub grass has grown back over the blast craters. The camouflage netting that once hid the most dangerous coastal defense battery in western Crimea is gone, burned or blown away in the fireball of secondary detonations. What remains are the impressions in the earth where the TEL vehicles sat, and the scatter pattern of metal that was once a weapon system worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes emissions, disciplined failures without mercy. The radar came up for 11 seconds. Ukraine needed every one of them. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine Radar.